If you remember making your way through the Midgar slums, taking on the Shinra Corporation, and doing the squat minigame, then you played Final Fantasy VII. But which one, the 1997 original or the remake? Well, in this video, we're going to compare the remake to the original, highlighting the similarities, differences, and changes between both versions. And yes, I will be going into full spoilers for the 2020 remake, but I will only cover the Midgar section of the original game. Okay, let's begin. Now, back in '97, the original game was very much a new chapter for the series. Not only was it the first mainline game to shift from Nintendo to Sony hardware, it would also transition from 2D to 3D graphics. You see, by the mid-90s, Square had very much perfected the 2D JRPG genre with games like Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger. And while it was obvious the industry was going 3D, the in-game graphics that home consoles could render at the time was still very basic. They worked for games like Ridge Racer, but Square, whose RPGs always relied on large, detailed environments, decided to take inspiration from games like Donkey Kong Country and Resident Evil and implement pre-rendered environments with a fixed camera for a large portion of the game. And these limitations would actually end up giving Final Fantasy VII a great atmosphere. The pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed camera turned every environment into a painting, literally. This allowed for the developers to create an incredible sense of both atmosphere and really strong aesthetics. If they wanted a small, intimate scene, they'd make a tiny environment with close-ups like the train cart or elevator. At the same time, they could really emphasize the sense of scale and show Shinra as this gigantic industrial machine by making this huge environment with the characters little more than a tiny dot. Now, as beautiful as they were, these environments could sometimes be a bit tricky to navigate, which is why the original Final Fantasy had this pointer feature. Now, FF7 Remake was developed for hardware that's generations ahead of the original. So naturally, not only are most of the graphics running in-engine, they also have a much higher resolution and texture quality. Now, like most modern RPGs, Remake has a third-person view with a controllable camera. And while this makes navigation much easier than the original, I do feel like having the camera always follow the main character in third-person mode does sometimes diminish a bit of the atmosphere from the original. When it comes to the story, the original game opens with the iconic scene of Aerith looking at the Mako League before stepping out into the city and the long pull-out shot. The remake starts with shots of life in Midgar, which establishes the game's theme of expanding the city and all of its locations. This is followed by the Aerith sequence, which is pretty much the same, only this time someone bumps into her and causes her to drop the flowers. In addition to the environmental theme of the game, this could also be a hint to the story going in a slightly different direction from the original. But not yet, because this first chapter of the remake sticks very close to the original. Cloud Strife, former soldier first class, is hired by Avalanche, led by Barrett Wallace, to blow up one of the city's reactors. That's right, while Western developers had you playing as cute purple dragons and wacky bandicoots breaking wooden boxes, the Japanese were like, hey kids, want to play as a mercenary who's hired to commit a terrorist attack? Now, while Final Fantasy VII did mark a big change in graphics and presentation, the gameplay was still very similar to its predecessor. In particular, the combat, which still utilized your typical turn-based RPG-style battle system, including all your expected Final Fantasy tropes like magic, special attacks, and summons. The original game also used the materia system for character customization, which, to me, always struck a good balance between ease of use and depth. The remake does a good job of updating the materia system, but retaining enough of the familiar elements for fans of the original to feel at home. Also, am I the only one who didn't realize how big they were until the remake? For some reason, I always thought they were these little magic marbles. The battle system has been overhauled, borrowing from remake contemporaries like Final Fantasy XV. There are no more random battles, instead all the combat takes place in real time in the same environment. Remake also incorporates modern action RPG mechanics in favor of the original's exclusively turn-based gameplay. However, the developers still found a way to repurpose the classic active time battle system from the original for spells and special moves. Now, the original version on PlayStation 1 had no auto-run. Luckily, the remake has both run and sprint, and you're gonna need it because you quickly realize that the locations in this game are much bigger than the original. For example, at the start of the original, Cloud went from the platform straight to the gate of the reactor where the Avalanche crew were trying to break in. In the remake, both the train station and the approach to the reactor have been built out into separate areas. Now, the character designs have been updated, but they're still on model. Cloud is still rocking the crazy hair and the parachute pants. Meanwhile, Barrett is still the size of a small transformer. Both the original and the remake have Cloud and Barrett plant the explosives and get ambushed by the game's first boss. And this is where the remake really shines, turning what was just another turn-based boss fight into this dynamic battle that still retains the strategies and tactics from the original, original while giving the combat a new sense of visual depth and dimension, which is just a fancy way of saying the robot now has a weak spot on its ass. With the boss defeated, it's time to escape the reactor before it blows. The simple backtracking bit from the original has now been replaced with a whole new section as the crew try to escape the flaming wreck of the reactor. Yeah, that's definitely something Cloud couldn't do in the original. Look, I know we're up against the clock, but the developers wouldn't have put these cardboard boxes here if they didn't want us to play with them. This is also where the story starts to differ. In the original, the crew blows up the reactor successfully, but the remake shows that the bomb didn't fully work and Shinra's bigwigs actually had to sabotage their own reactor. And once the explosion does happen, the modern visuals do a great job at conveying the extent of the damage. In both versions, the crew then head for the train through the rubble of Sector 8. And here is where we see the upside of having a dynamic camera. You get a much better sense of the impact the explosion had on the sector in the remake. Just look at all those poor people. Apart from this lady, she's clearly fine, it's probably just some bad constipation. Now, in the original, this part is pretty straightforward. Cloud has his meet cute with Aerith, gets cornered by the Shinra soldiers, and jumps on the train. As for the remake, well, this is where things start to take a bit of a left turn. First, Cloud starts having these visions of Sephiroth. He does meet Aerith, but their meet cute is interrupted by a bunch of Dementors. Cloud then runs around the streets of Sector 8 taking on battalions of soldiers. Geez, you'd think he'd jack one of these cars or at least a bike.
Oh shit, here we go again.
And this section is kind of a setup for what the rest of the remake is going to be like. It has all the parts you remember with more details, but also a lot more padding and filler. Plus, every now and then something will happen that will make you say, hey, I don't remember that in the original. For example, in the original, the crew arrive at the Sector 7 slums. They go to Tifa's bar where the two childhood friends reconnect through a flashback. Cloud gets his money for the job before being recruited to help with the Sector 5 job. He then goes to sleep in the basement and wakes up the next morning ready to start the next mission. Great, a bit of character setup, a bit of backstory while still keeping the plot moving. Just what you need in these early sections of the game. The remake has Cloud arrive at Sector 7, go to Tifa's bar, ask for his money, only to be told that it's getting late and he needs to go to bed. He then follows Tifa to some motel, gets part of his money, and then goes to bed. Hey, you know that feeling when you're fast asleep and then suddenly you need to pee really bad? Hold on, what's Sephiroth doing here? Oh wait, no, it's just some guy in a black cloak. Okay, whatever, time to go to the bar to start the Sector 5 job, right?
Let's get down to business, shall we? These water filters won't replace themselves.
Ironically enough, Cloud has the same expression as the player does at this point in the game. So you run around the town selling water filters, then join the neighborhood watch, fight a bunch of these generic monsters.
So that's what a soldier looks like in action.
You then talk to this NPC who will give you a bunch of side quests to do. Okay, that's cool if you're into that, but I'd like to focus on the main campaign for now. Sure, let's go back to 7th Heaven where Cloud actually gets rejected for the job he's supposed to do. He then fights some random hoodlums and goes back to the hotel where he meets Jessie. She gives him the summoning materia Ifrit, which is cool, but in exchange he has to accompany her up to the top plate to loot a warehouse for more explosives, and even that part has filler in it. You see, in order to get to the top, we have to do this modified G-bike sequence and take on this fella with the world's longest bike front. You think he's trying to overcompensate for something? You then break into Jessie's parents' house and steal her dying father's ID card. Then you break into the warehouse and fight a few waves of enemies, including the bike guy again, before finally returning to the slums. The next morning, Cloud and the rest of the crew have to fight off a Dementor invasion, and then, only then, is Cloud asked to join in on the Sector 5 job. Now look, obviously I didn't expect a PlayStation 4 game to be a shot-for-shot remake of a PlayStation 1 game, and I appreciate that the original locations have been expanded. The G-bike sequence is a nice addition, and it's good to flash out some of the secondary characters, but there's just a bit too much padding for my liking. Okay, so the Reactor 5 section is pretty straightforward in the original. Cloud, Tifa, and Barrett get the train, but their fake IDs mess up, and they have to jump out early. They go through the rail tunnels, then climb up the plate, they infiltrate the reactor, and set the charges before being ambushed by Airbuster and the President, who reveals it's all a cover-up. The reactor blows up and Cloud drops down below. Now the remake follows all the same beats, but as expected expands on each section. The 2 train panels are now an entire chapter. This bit has been turned into its own chapter, and so has the reactor. But hey, at least they kept the synchronized switch minigame from the original. And I guess the upside of the remake taking its time is that the main characters do get to interact more, which gives them a bit more character development this early in the story. Cloud's internal struggles are also better presented in the remake. Cloud's meeting with Aerith at the church and their subsequent pursuit by the Turks is pretty much the same in both versions. Only in the remake, the Dementors are also flying around. In the remake, we spend a chapter navigating the slums. Yes, the detail is great and it gives a better sense of the impact of Avalanche's attacks on the community, but come on, where's the guy living in the pipe with all the trophies and the dog food bowl? Did you ever look at all these flowers in the original and think, I wish I could pick them? Well, you're gonna love the remake. The remake also ends this chapter with a boss fight against Rude from the Turks, which is absent from the original. This one section from the original has now been expanded into a whole mini dungeon where you have to keep working these mechanical arms. You know, because there was that one arm thing in the original. But hey, at least the big chonker hamster slide at the end is the same as it was before. Glad to see the developers realized you just can't mess with perfection. Ironically enough, the pre-rendered environments do kind of make a comeback in the remake. Every time you're outside in the slums, if you look up, you'll see the sky is actually made out of one big pre-rendered texture. And then we get the infamous wall market sequence. Now, in the original, this was a quirky little part of the game. Tifa was being held at Dawn Corneo's mansion, and the only way to get in was to dress Cloud up as a girl. The outfit comprised of a dress and a wig. The dress would be made by this guy found at the bar, and the wig would be obtained via the squat minigame. Now, the remake expands this whole section into one big fever dream. Cloud has to do jobs for Arthur Morgan Chocobo Wrangler, get a sensual massage from this lady, go several rounds in the Battle Coliseum, and then take on Hell House. That's right, the evil house from the original. You then get the squat minigame, but this time there is an entire big dance sequence minigame complete with lights, showgirls, and costume changes. The original game also had Corneo choose one of the 3 characters depending on your actions earlier, but in the remake it's always Cloud. Afterwards, the trio are dropped in the sewers where they take on this boss before escaping and making their way through the train graveyard. As expected, the sewers and the train graveyard have been expanded into a chapter each in the remake. The party then climb up the pillar supporting the sector plate, hoping to stop Shinra in time before they blow it up and frame them for the explosion. In the remake, a big portion of the section actually has you play as Aerith as she goes back to the slums to save Marlene. Biggs and Jesse still die, but this time around you spend a bit more time with each of them. This, plus the character development from earlier on, makes their deaths a lot more impactful in the remake. Both versions then have the party go back to Aerith's house and find Marlene safe. We then get the story of Aerith's origin from her adopted mother. At this point in the original, the trio go back to Wall Market where they climb the wall up to the top. Meanwhile, the remake decides to throw some more filler at us. We run around the slums for a bit, then find Wedge who's still alive, and then take on these failed experiment Shinra monsters. Cloud and Co then take Wedge back to Aerith's house, then go off to climb the wall. But no, you can't just climb the wall in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Instead, the party have to venture into the sewers, chase this pig rat thing around because it has a locket that this guy needs, then run into Dawn Corneo again and fight his monster. After all that, you finally get the hook shot which you can use to scale up the wall. Hold on, look, there's still pipes running along the side. Why couldn't they just climb them? Now, it's not all bad in the remake. Climbing up the rubble in the original did always feel a bit awkward due to the pre-rendered environments and limited character movements. Yep, just walking up these wires. The remake really does improve this section. Not only does it feel like the scene of a real calamity, it also takes the opportunity to show the real scale and scope of Midgar. And this also applies to the Shinra headquarters building when you get to the top, which was always just one panel in the original. Speaking of which, the original gives you 2 options to infiltrate the building. Either go through the front door, guns blazing, or sneak in through the back stairs. Once again, the remake eliminates any type of choice, having the trio go through the garage and then take the stairs. In the original, the trio make it to the 59th floor and then search for the keycards to make it up to the restricted floors. And I think the remake did a great job reimagining both the building layout and the quest to get the keycards. The cutscene with Shinra's plan for the future that turns into a hellscape is a particularly nice touch. Plus, Cloud still has to crawl through the toilet air vent to spy on the board meeting. Both versions have the trio ambush Hojo, save Aerith, and and meet Red 13. They find Genova, but in the remake she's the centerpiece of this giant room. Now Sephiroth is around in the original, but you never see him during this section. That's what makes it so eerie. The party are always one step behind, following his bloody footprints, literally. In the remake, Sephiroth turns up and slashes the walkway, sending the crew into this drum section, which turns out to be a whole dungeon that has you split into two parties to navigate. And to me, this part really did slow down the momentum of the story. Also, Red 13 does join the party, but only as a guest character who you can't control. In the original, the party make it to the president's office and find that he's been killed by Sephiroth. Cloud then takes on his son Rufus, while the others fight this big robot in the elevator going down. In the remake, you actually get to see Sephiroth turn up and kill the president, then kill Barrett, only to turn out to be another hooded guy who transforms into a Genova monster which you have to fight. Meanwhile, the whole building's being swarmed by these ghost things. One of them actually cures Barrett. We then get some more Sephiroth fuckery before finally taking on Rufus and his pet dog. The original game's Midgar section ended with the iconic G-Bike sequence on the highway and then a boss battle against Motorball. The remake has this updated, sleek-looking G-Bike sequence, the kind we dream about playing as kids in the 90s. Plus, it incorporates the Motorball boss battle into the actual bike sequence, which is a great idea. This entire section is a 10 out of 10. And now that we've reached the end of the road, it's time to stare at the horizon ahead and bid farewell to Midgar, right? Hold on, Sephiroth, you're not supposed to be here. Zack? Oh, you're definitely not supposed to be here. And why is the whole city covered in ghosts? Turns out these things are actually called the Whispers, and they are beings sent by the planet itself to enforce a fixed future. So they've been interfering every time something was going to happen that changed the timeline. We then get this big battle sequence against the Whispers where the main characters see flashes of their future, or at least of what it was supposed to be, and this would have made a pretty good final boss fight for the end of the game. And then it seems like the developers went, wait, hold on, this is a Final Fantasy VII game, we have to have a Sephiroth fight at the end. And this boss battle very much feels like a collection of Final Fantasy VII greatest hits. We've got Midgar being shattered into 1,000 pieces, Sephiroth grows the one wing while his theme plays, the main characters doing their most memorable bits, and even the meteor itself makes a cameo. And regardless of what you think about its impact on the plot, this entire sequence is visually gorgeous. Insane, but visually gorgeous. After the boss battle, Cloud meets Sephiroth at the edge of creation, where Sephiroth makes the old come to the dark side offer. Cloud declines, and then after a quick duel, Sephiroth gives us a few more vague, ominous lines about having 7 seconds left, and then bails. Just like the original, the party find themselves back in their own dimension at the edge of Midgar, ready to depart on their journey. Okay, so at least after throwing the player this big alternate reality curveball, the game ends on a familiar note. Oh, no it doesn't. Turns out Zack survives and brings Cloud back. And so there we have it, the original Final Fantasy VII compared to the remake, which ended up being more of a reinterpretation or a retelling, but I guess calling it that wouldn't have had the same marketing pull. Like many fans going into the remake, I expected some things to be altered, but this game really did take a left turn, especially at the end. Now, to be fair, it's only the first part of a trilogy, so I think it's best to save final judgment until it's complete. And as much as I am a canon purist, the opportunity to tell an alternate version of one of the most beloved stories in video games does pique my interest. It's a bold move from the developers, I'll give them that much, as the potential for fan backlash is emerald weapon sized. As for the gameplay, I thought the remake did a great job at adapting the original game's battle and materia system into a contemporary action RPG. It retained just enough of the original elements to make these systems feel familiar while still modernizing them. Remake's visuals were, for the most part, impressive and did a good job at reinterpreting the original, although I did feel like some of the atmosphere and aesthetics have been lost in the modernization. My main problem with the game is all the padding and filler, and I do realize that adapting a game as big as Final Fantasy VII to modern standards wouldn't really be possible in one installment. But structurally, Remake very much feels like the developers made the decision to just have Midgar from the start and then work to pad out the game. And for a fan of the original, playing Remake very much felt like a compromise. The game knows what you came for, and it does give it to you eventually, but only after it's made you work for a bunch of of padding and filler to get there. But that's just my take. Please let me know your memories of the original Final Fantasy VII and your thoughts on the remake in the comments. How did the remake stack up? What did you think of all the changes and additions to both story and gameplay? And are you excited for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth? Also, please let me know if you'd like to see me do the same type of video comparing the original to Rebirth when it comes out. As always, thanks for watching. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and a big thanks to all my existing patrons. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.